The world's most sustainable businesses are all Nordic. That's according to the recently published Global 100 Index. But that is chance. But is that chance, or is it something more fundamental at work? Today we're exploring the origins and innovation of sustainability success in Nordic countries. Joining me are our ambassadors, their excellencies. His Excellency Frans Michael Schult, Melbourne, Ambassador of Denmark to the UAE. His Excellency Sten Arne Rosnes, Ambassador of Norway to the UAE. Her Excellency Mariana Ettala, Charge d'Affaires, Embassy of Finland to the UAE. And His Excellency Jan Teslev, Commissioner General of the Swedish Committee for Participation at Expo 2020. Thank you all for joining us. Shall we start with Your Excellency, Melbourne?
Yes, please.
Of the world's 3 most sustainable companies in last year's Global 100, 2 are from Denmark. What can companies worldwide learn from Denmark's eco-friendly business landscape?
Thank you very much. I think the most important lesson for sure is that you need to make sustainability a part of your business if you're going to be successful and being very sustainable. So the key has really been that for the Danish companies who do try to seek value and drive their businesses forward have tried to be very forward-leaning on the green agenda because they saw that as a business opportunity. So there's been a huge focus for many years in Denmark moving businesses towards a more sustainable profile simply because that is the direction they saw the market moving in. And that made them make it their business to be sustainable. And I think that is a very important lesson because you can see tendencies, if you look at CSR, for example, companies that invest in education or help for the needy and things like that. But in Denmark, we have another tradition where we have made CSR part of your business. So if you're into transportation, you make your transportation knowledge part of your CSR drive. And if you're into making cocoa, then you make that part of your CSR drive. And the same thing with sustainability. It's simply been an integrated part of the Danish business processes when they were developing the businesses to make sure that they went where the profits were in sustainability. That's also how you make it a viable business proposition. That's how you make it sustainable for businesses to continue to drive in that direction. And Ørsted, which is one of the 2 that you just mentioned now, is a great example of that. They came from the oil and gas industry, and they are now the leading company, maybe even the world's leading company when it comes to renewable energy investments. And of course, those kind of transformations are very strategic, but they are also driven by key business considerations on where is the market moving. And I think that's a very important lesson. Go where the market is. That's sustainable for a company. And green is sustainable. Thank you very much.
It's that word that we hear all the time, pivot. Your Excellency Rosnes, Norway's sovereign wealth fund is one of the largest in the world. Sustainability in investments is essential for long-term value creation. How do you put wealth to work along sustainability lines?
Well, the basic idea of the fund is that it belongs to several generations. So every decision needs to be taken with sustainability in mind. And it is, of course, one of the largest funds globally. The 2 main principles is transparency and active management. And by transparency, you retain, the confidence of those who are involved that this is going to be a sustainable long-term investment that will be, available for many, many years to come. And with active management, also you have a possibility to influence some of the companies that you are buying into, because it's equities, it's also papers, and it's also real estate. So the Input from the political side is from Parliament. They decide the guidelines, and sustainability, of course, is one of the main things that they not only expect, but also do as mandatory for the investment policy. And the Ministry of Finance. So it's not really political in the sense that it is changing if there is a change of government. It's meant to be long-term. But there is also one important feature that improves, I think, sustainability, and that is that there is a possibility to make exemptions that certain companies, certain sectors will not be part of the fund if they are not acting in an environmentally responsible way. So creating, confidence, retaining confidence, seeing this is a long-term investment means that sustainability has to be built in.
I really love that perspective, that if you think of wealth as belonging to future generations, you can't help but be sustainable. Your Excellency Ettala, Finland is known for its work-life balance and education. It also leads the world in sustainable development. What are some of the deeper reasons for the Nordic focus on sustainability, in your opinion?
Okay, thank you very much. So often when we talk about sustainability, we talk about the Nordic countries, and this is of course reflecting how well the countries are performing in a lot of the international rankings. So I think when we are thinking or trying to find the reasons behind the Nordic focus on sustainability, it's good to, perhaps to take a closer look on some of these rankings. So as you mentioned in your question, I was happy to read a few weeks back about Finland ranking first in the UN and I think it's Bertelsmann Foundation who are responsible for this quite well-known report, annual report. And here I will check my notes. So according to the ranking, Finland has achieved or is close to achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals related to poverty alleviation, health, education, water, energy, reducing inequality, peace, and the rule of law. We too still have some challenges, of course, to face, including fighting against climate change, need for more sustainable consumption and production patterns, and halting biodiversity loss. But I do have to say that, in my opinion, here you can already see many of the factors at play. There is no one easy solution for sustainability, but you can see there's a range of factors at play. And I believe there's really a strong linkage between sustainable development and the Nordic model, as we say, the Nordic welfare state model, which can in many ways perhaps explain some of the good performance the Nordic countries are showing in many of these rankings. And perhaps still to point out a few examples. For example, the high value we place on as was already mentioned, innovation, transparency, accountability, also social fairness and equality, focus on well-being, where well-being is often associated with the well-being of one's living environment as well. And then also, I would say, education, which is something that is important, and quality of life, for example, the good work and life balance, as you had also mentioned in your question. So just to point out a few factors that I believe are quite important, and finally to point out also that the Nordic countries, according to studies, have some of the most conscious consumers as well. So this is something that all has to be then of course, taken into account by the corporate life in the Nordic countries as well, and which in turn probably explains as well why there are so many Nordic companies performing well in the rankings of, for example, the Global 100 by the Corporate Knights. Thanks.
Your Excellency Teslev, for the second year in a row, IKEA was ranked as Sweden's most innovative company. What makes Sweden a hotbed for innovation and sustainability?
Thank you very much. I think there is something special about small and middle-sized countries. We never look at our own borders as our home market. We have to look beyond our borders to find our markets. And in the same way, I think there is a lesson that has been learned by my country, sometimes the hard way, sometimes a softer way, and that is, if you don't innovate, you will deteriorate. I think there are also lessons that not only Sweden, of course, many countries have drawn from the pandemic. The need for resilience, the need for looking differently at life cycle cost, for example. And all this has changed the narrative around sustainability and innovation. I think there are two maybe coinciding factors when it comes to Sweden. One is the factor of openness. We have traditionally, of course, together with our Nordic friends and neighbors, been very good at disclosing the openness of Swedish enterprise. Very good disclosures, transparency. And then the other thing that I, as Commissioner General of Sweden at Expo 2020, feel is so important is to look at sustainability in the broad sense. Sometimes, as soon as you mention sustainability, people think about the environment, or about climate, or combating climate change. But it's actually about sustainability in a social sense, in a governance sense, in an economic sense. Because nothing is sustainable if it's not profitable when it comes to our companies. So how can we make sustainability profitable? I think that's one of the lessons we have gone through. And then another aspect maybe, and if I may quote my Prime Minister, we very often stand in front of situations where we have to resist or embrace change. And our Prime Minister once said, "I'm not afraid of the new technologies, I'm afraid of the old ones." So somehow change will catch up with us sooner or later. So embracing change early, taking it on board and making that change your own, I think is maybe a signum of Sweden, but for sure also of our Nordic friends. Maybe one more reflection is, what is sustainable companies? What are characteristic for them? I think it's characteristic in a way that they have their eye very much fixed on the future, because sustainability has to do with time. And if you have a strategic view, and if you engage your entire staff, your customers, those who work with you, to reach that goal. And now I come to IKEA that you mentioned initially. I think that they have done exactly that. They have, first of all, kept their eye on the whole value chain. They have eliminated the middleman as much as they can. Actually, they have made the consumer the middleman. We all know the flat packaging of IKEA. You buy it, you assemble it, and you live with it. And thereby, you also reduce the carbon footprint of your business. And somehow, by working as they have done, the flat packaging, maybe it could be of interest for those of you who don't know, was introduced already in 1956. So this is not something new that has come in later years. But by really engaging your staff, engaging the consumers in the process, you get a much bigger and better understanding for where you're heading business-wise.
Thank you very much. So now, if I can throw the same question open to all of you. I'll start with Your Excellency Melbourne. Sustainable business has a positive impact on society, the environment and the economy. What lessons can UAE corporates take on board as they look to emerge out of the pandemic on a sustainable footing from our Nordic friends?
I think the most important lesson is adaptability to the shifting tides of the economic conditions that are. And one of the things that we've been good at in the Nordic countries and not least in Denmark is that we have reform policies that are proactive instead of being reactive. So there is a tradition to try to adjust the business environment, the societal environment, before you run into the next large crisis. And you can see that in things like the forward-looking pension systems that some of us have. You can see that in the way that there is a high degree of investments going on in the companies towards research and development, because people anticipate that that is a secure investment and will eventually pay off. So this flexibility to the shifting tides is very important, and we've seen that during the Corona crisis. Denmark, certainly after the latest revisions have come in, maybe the country that has done best amongst the Western countries during Corona, and a high degree of innovation in your products, a high degree of competence, being able to deliver world-class products and services, of course, makes you more robust. So making that your cutting edge and driving your companies and yourself in that direction, I think is a big plus. And the thumb of the rule for large Danish companies that are small or medium-sized in other countries, because we're such a small country, but for large Danish companies is, if you're not number 1 or 2 in the world in what you're doing, then it's not the right business for your company. That's sort of the thumb of the rule. So that's a tip to some of you out there. Thank you.
That's a very harsh reality, yes. Your Excellency Rosnes.
Yes, no, I think if you look at Norway, we have been in the forefront of innovation, especially when it comes to the maritime sector and energy. And electrification has been a very important part of that. So I think in our contact and our cooperation with companies that are based here in Dubai or in Abu Dhabi and the Emirates and the region, the maritime sector and the energy sector are among those where I think there are more examples that can be useful to local and regional partners. And we also have Innovation Norway in Dubai, which is helping our companies and Emirati companies also to find good partners. But I think electrification is maybe one of the interesting areas for many companies. And I think the energy sector also is going through a very profound transformation that opens up necessity for much deeper and much wider partnerships.
Yeah, there's definitely room for collaboration there.
Okay,
Your
thank
Excellency
you.
Ettala.
Perhaps to go back briefly to this Agenda 2030, where one of the core messages was really that no one should be left behind. So this is something that, as said, resonates closely to the Nordic model as well. So this whole variety of factors that I listed earlier, perhaps some of them are some ways of working that can be also adapted here by local business leaders, and perhaps developing them further to make them more practicable in any given context. Maybe perhaps to point out really transparency and accountability. I think some of, for example, Neste, which is one of the companies that have really performed well in these sustainability rankings, they have really pointed out that these are some of the trends that will make a lot of a big importance on sustainability and development in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Your Excellency Teslev, what can we learn from your nation?
I think that so much has already been said, but maybe just one comment. I think we have to dwell into how the preferences and choices of our consumer has changed and will change. And I remember in March last year, the pandemic was new. And some people said, yes, in June, July, things will go back to what it was before. We all know now it didn't go back to what it was before. And I think we can all agree that it will not go back to what it was before. There are many horrible lessons from the pandemic, but there are also lessons of resilience and how we dealt with the pandemic that we should bring with us into the future. When we deal with our consumers, when we deal with our colleagues in the companies or in administration. So it's a time for quick reflection and then action forward.
My favorite expression, the new normal, unprecedented times. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. Your Excellency Frans Melbourn, Schalk Melbourn. Frans Michael Schalk Melbourn. Your Excellency Sten Arna Rosnes, Your Excellency Marianne Ettala, and Your Excellency Jan Teslev. Thank you all for your time today.